Hey everybody, and Tony here with my review of Verdi's Aida with once again conductor Nicola Luisotti, which I saw at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden. This marks the fourth overall time I saw Calixto Bieto's production of Verdi's Aida at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden because I wanted to see and hear Eve Maud Hubeaux perform the role of Amneris, as she was the second mezzo who took over an indisposed Ketevan Kemoklidze, who was originally supposed to sing Amneris on the 22nd and the 25th, but she called in sick and had two other mezzos take over her place, the first one being Teresa Romano, and tonight being Eve Maud Hubeaux. I first saw and heard Eve Maud Hubeaux perform the role of La Reine Gertrude from Ambroise Thomas' Hamlet 4 years ago at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. And I did have some mixed feelings about her performance in that role, as I thought that she didn't have enough heft to make this mother figure come alive, let alone enough dramatic intensity to make the role serviceable. She was a fine and gorgeous singing actress, but she had a lot of vocal reservations. Here as Amneris, the vocal reservations I had for Miss Eve Maud Hubeaux skyrocketed. However, her performance is not necessarily bad per se. There were actually some good moments about her performance as Amneris. Theatrically speaking, I love the way that she was able to use her elegant looks, and she was an absolutely beautiful figure on stage to make Amneris both this noble, elegant, regal, and classy princess, but at the same time make her this jealous, petulant, and very conflicted young woman who knows that she loves Radames body and soul, but kind of feels like she has to play second fiddle to her own slave girl, Aida. And she's caught in such a dilemma until that tragic end where she has no choice but to accept that their fate is in their hands, and her fate might as well just to be alone after everything that happened. Moreover, Eve Maud Hubeaux did have some reliable top notes no matter where she appeared in, whether it was in the judgment scene or in her very first act in the opera, and she also had some serviceable chest tones, at least in the beginning. However, when it came to those chest tones in the later parts of the opera, some of them were hollow and some of them were still there, but I will talk about how she managed those chest tones a little bit later in this review. But in terms of the positives, there were definitely things I did enjoy about Eve Maud Hubeaux's performance as Amneris. Her elegance, her ability to play the juxtaposition between Amneris as this elegant and classy princess and this jealous, angry lover, but at the same time feels that once Radames is about to be condemned by Ramphis and the priests, she unleashes all of her anger and fury and just lets it all out with abandon. And she is also a very dedicated actress who can play up those aspects about Amneris very well. And like I said, she did have good chest tones when she used them. However, this is sort of where my praise for Eve Maud Hubeaux's Amneris ends, because there are a lot of problems with her voice. First of all, she didn't really coordinate chest voice and head voice that well, causing her voice to sound unsupported, woofy, and just kind of squally in certain areas, as well as just way too light sounding to make the role of Amneris this fully realized character. This is also attributed to a lack of core, which caused Eve Maud Hubeaux to sing in The Mask given to screaming, given to shouting, and given to other bad habits that hampered her performance in the role, thus making her sound masky, unsupported, chorless, and even to the point where she ends up screaming as a last resort just to try to sound big. And speaking about sounding big, that's another problem that Evmod Hubeaux had as a vocalist. In order to try to sound big, let alone dark and naturally full like any good mezzo should, she artificially darkened her voice to make herself sound imposing to the point where she can't really use her natural voice to make Amneris come alive, let alone use whatever natural chest voice is there, and coordinated chest voice at that, to make her sound a lot more focused. Because there were several occasions that chorlessness and the inability to make head voice and chest voice coordinated made her sound muddy, made her sound pitchy, and made her sound completely unfocused as to what she's singing. I will not fault her for singing all of her vowels well, but there were occasions where some of her vowels sounded compromised. There were times that she made some wrong sounds, but I will give her credit though. There were several occasions where she did a good job in keeping that oval shape when she was hitting some of the high notes and did not spread her mouth wide open just to hit them. So there was focus on that particular part of her voice, but when it came to the rest of her voice, it didn't really travel too well. And there were a lot of occasions where it felt stuck and it felt like she was clipping her wings, all because she was just trying to sound dark like a mezzo, trying to sound as if though that she were more imposing than she should be. And just listening to Evmod Hubeaux a lot more critically, I feel like she is essentially an underdeveloped soprano trying to sound like a mezzo, let alone an unrealized Falcon trying to sound like a proper mezzo. And her judgment scene at times felt underwhelming because of that chorlessness, because of that lack of coordination between head voice and chest voice, even to the point where she was singing in collapsed head voice before launching her curse at the priests, let alone when she was begging Ramphis and the priests to not condemn Radames with her utterances of "Ah, lo salvate, nu mi pietà, nu mi pietà." Even when she tried to salvage herself with her final line screaming "Empiarazza anatema su voi," there were occasions where it felt rather underwhelming, with the exception of that final top note, which she was able to launch with abandon. It says something when dramatic sopranos who sang Amneris, such as Margaret Harshaw, Rossi Belli, Astrid Varnay, Ingrid Steger, Sigrid Kehl, Gena Dimitrova, and Isolde Eichlepp had way more developed chest tones, coordinated chest tones, and equally blazing top notes, especially where Astrid Varnay and Gena Dimitrova are concerned. It says something when Falcon or Zwischenfach singers such as Giulietta Simeonato, Blanche Thiebaum, Nell Rankin, Gloria Lane, Christa Ludwig, Shirley Verrett, and Grace Bumbry have way more coordinated chest tones and absolutely fabulous chest tones to make Amneris a seductive and absolutely regal figure who can have that seething jealousy accompanied by her vocal power. And finally, it says something that real mezzosopranos such as Gianna Pederzini, Ebestiniani, Elena Nicolai, Aurelia Dominguez, Irina Arkhipova, Rita Gore, and Elena Obraztsova have way more chest tones, especially where Aurelia Dominguez, Irina Arkhipova, and Elena Obraztsova have real chesty voices to make Amneris a powerful figure and an absolute powerhouse at that. Therefore, whenever I want real Amnerises, whether they be dramatic sopranos, falcon singers, or real dramatic mezzos, I can never go wrong with Astrid Varnay, Shirley Verrett, Grace Bumbry, Irina Arkhipova, Aurelia Dominguez, and Elena Obraztsova, unless I forget about Giulietta Signonato, who I argue was the complete package of hitting those chesty chest tones and hitting some blazing top notes. Those singers had way more to offer vocally and dramatically than what Eve Maud Hubeaux could ever accomplish. However, even in spite of Miss Hubeaux's vocal flaws, I still have to give her a good amount of credit for what she was able to accomplish theatrically as Amneris. It's not an easy job taking over Ketevan Kemoklidze, let alone making the role her own, even considering Kemoklidze's unfortunate indisposition due to her illness. However, I still have to credit Eve Maud Hubeaux for being sufficiently brave to take on Amneris, even with all of those gaping vocal flaws. I still encourage her to develop her chest tones, coordinate head voice and chest voice, and keep on developing her core, especially where the big dramatic mezzo roles are concerned. Or if she feels like those roles are too big and too uncomfortable for her to sing, which is quite clear to when I listen to her, she should actually just take a step back and stick with roles that are lyrical and sensitive, and therefore call for sensitive singing, such as Octavian from Rosenkavalier and the composer from Ariadne of Naxos. There's nothing wrong with trying to take a few steps back and sticking with roles that are actually more adept with her voice. The problem is just pushing those limits where it's too impossible to reach and therefore delivering a mediocre performance. Unfortunately, that was what Eve Maud Hubeaux did in terms of her voice, but theatrically speaking, I felt like she was able to just let it all out and own it in terms of what she was able to accomplish with her stage presence. So a few good points for her on there, but she just needs to develop her core and ensure that she remains conscientious with her repertoire choice. It was announced that Maria Jose Siri was ill, and when she started the first act before ending it with Ritorna Vincitor, she was unfortunately too ill to sing, which was a shame because the little snippets that she had before she ended up being taken over by another soprano in terms of being her singing voice, she was able to sing with more nuance and she was able to use a lot more sensitivity in her voice as well as her overall acting as Aida. So that's one part that I could still commend Maria Jose Siri for, and especially where she was able to act more convincingly as Aida. The soprano who took over the rest of her singing tonight was none other than the Russian spinto/dramatic soprano Oksana Nosatova. It's clear to hear that Miss Nosatova had really great high notes, and she was able to project those high notes all throughout the theater with everything she's got, and she was able to deliver some of those ringing top notes with full abandon, and they were absolutely audible throughout all the theater, whether they be her B flats or her Bs or her Cs. She was in her A game tonight. Yes, her middle was creamy and it was lovely and soft. However, there were occasions where she could use a lot more chest voice and head voice coordination because the lower parts of her voice sounded a little bit inaudible, which caused for an imbalance in the registers. Sure, Oksana Nosatova can have some reliable chest tones and she can have a reliable head voice to sing the role of Aida well. And of course, her top notes are absolutely wonderful when she launched at them. But she could use a lot more coordination, she could use a lot more warmth in her voice, and she could use a lot more vocal charisma. I also looked into Oksana Nosatova's repertoire, and she sang roles ranging from Mimi from La Boheme to Tosca from Tosca to Santuzza all the way up to Turandot. And she's also no stranger to Aida, let alone to Abigail from Nabucco. So she has a very varied repertoire bordering from spinto to dramatic. And it's quite clear to hear in how she was able to launch at those top notes. And the color of her voice, which is quite steely, but also has that nice creaminess to it, although it can benefit from more head voice and chest voice coordination, as well as a lot more charisma. I still have to give a lot of credit to Oksana Nosatova for vocally rescuing Maria Jose Siri as Aida, and I do hope that she'll be able to either take over Maria Jose Siri and the final performance as Aida, or if Maria Jose Siri manages to recover from her illness, here's hoping that she will return to the role of Aida, as well as the final performance as Aida, full guns blazing. But if ever Maria Jose Siri decides to drop the final performance so that she can recover, here's hoping that Oksana Nosatova will take over her shoes and will therefore sing the final performance. Whatever the outcome, let's just see what's going to happen in the final performance. And to Maria Jose Siri, I hope that she gets well soon so that she can perform in much better shape as well as in much better coordination. Victoria Randem, what more can I say about her? She was still a vocal miracle as the High Priestess, and she was able to use that gorgeous lyric soprano voice of hers to make the High Priestess a great character to witness, and she deserves all the A+ I can give to her. Ivan Magri definitely improved a lot more as Radames. Sure, I'm still not crazy about the timbre for his voice. I'm not so crazy about this lyric tenor taking on Radames, but the fact that he was able to project very well throughout the theater is commendable, and he was able to be a lot more vocally and theatrically involving as Radames, which I give him a lot of good marks for. Gonzalo Quinchoal is still the charmingly charismatic messenger, all thanks to his beautiful full lyric tenor voice. Erwin Schrott did improve a little bit more, even though I'm still not a fan of him as Ramfis. And I'll always say this once and I'll always say this again, should actually sing Amunazro instead of singing Ramfis because his bass baritone voice is more ideal for the king of Ethiopia rather than the chief of the high priests. But this time he was able to give a more vocally satisfying performance as Ramfis, even with his voice not being totally ideal for the chief of the high priests. Grigory Shkarupa became less throaty every time I heard him live on stage, and here's hoping that he will continue to develop his voice in the right way, get rid of any throatiness, and give in to full-on squealo singing, because Grigory Shkarupa's performance as the King of Egypt was still as charismatic as ever, all thanks to that fine basso cantante voice, which continues to intrigue me, as well as see a lot more potential for additional growth. Even though I'm still not a fan of Alfredo Dazza as Amonasro in terms of his voice, he was still able to grow into the character a lot more in terms of his voice and in terms of his acting. He was also announced ill for the evening, and even with that illness, he was still able to provide a lot more nuance to the character, especially reflected in how he not only did his best to sing as loudly as possible, but also become a lot more committed as a singing actor. So he was consistent in terms of growing into this character, as well as trying his darndest to sing the role as well as he could. And even though I'm still not a fan of Alfredo Dazza taking a lot of these huger, dramatic baritone roles, I still appreciate his dedication. I still appreciate his overall charisma. And I also appreciate the determination that he was able to give off as Amonasro. Even with those vocal shortcomings, he did what he had to do in terms of just making the role his own and giving it his all. So overall, yes, the singing still varied in quality, but at least I still have to give kudos to all the singers for at least doing what they can to make the roles their own. And even when some of them fell ill, they did what they had to do in order to just thrive on stage. Hubeaux is not my favorite voice for Amneris because at worst, she sounds like an undeveloped soprano trying to sound like a big mezzo, and at best, she is just trying not to be drowned out by the orchestra, even though she tries what she can to let her voice out by the occasional screaming, as well as trying to sound big like a real mezzo. But even with all of those vocal caveats and those gaping vocal flaws that Hubeaux had as Amneris, I still have to give her credit for just courageously tackling the role with charisma, with bravery, and with elegance, beauty, charm, and just a whole lot of lovability. It also helped that she looked lovely as Amneris, and she looked quite sinuous and beautiful in the role. So there are some plus points for her, even though her voice could grow in a lot more core and in a lot more depth. I also have to give a lot of kudos to Oksana Nosatova for doing a superb job in rescuing the entire evening, especially when Mario Jose Siri called in sick and could only act the part. And with Oksana Nosatova's vocal resources, they were actually pretty good, although she can develop a lot more in core and in coordinated chest tones. And the rest of the singers, Victoria Randem, Ivan Magri, Gonzalo Quinchawal, Erwin Schrott, Grigori Shkarupa, and Alfredo Dazza continued to be very consistent in their respective roles, especially where Grigori Shkarupa's, Gonzalo Quinchawal's, and Victoria Randem's consistently wonderful vocal efforts were concerned. They were all able to sound really great in terms of Mr. Shkarupa being a lot less throaty in his previous performances, Gonzalo Quinchawal growing into such a beautiful full lyric tenor whose talent and whose skills are more fully realized, and Victoria Randem continuing to be as elegant and beautiful as ever as a vocalist. These three singers that I've mentioned deserve all of my praise and deserve all the salutes I can give them. And even with Ivan Magri's, Erwin Schrott's, and Alfredo Dazza's vocal shortcomings, they were still able to do good jobs in their roles and were able to grow in a lot more into their respective characters. So there was definitely some good effort all around, even with this currently tenuous fall season, where singers are calling in sick, and I can understand how difficult it is to try to make your body adjust to the current season. So here's also hoping for a good recovery for Maria Jose Siri and Alfredo Daza. The conducting done by Nicola Luisotti was surprisingly a lot more nuanced than the previous performances. Sure, he could use a little bit more nuance and a lot more lushness in some of the lush parts, but other than that, he was still able to find a way to just hold some back, even though he had the occasional blasting. And the chorus and orchestra, the Staatsoper Unter den Linden, are always reliable and were pros all around. So overall, with the continuous mixed feelings I have about Evmod Hubeaux taking on these dramatic mezzo roles, especially where Amneris is concerned, at least she was still able to give a serviceable performance as Amneris. Even with the lack of core, even with her uncoordinated chest voice and head voice, and the major tendencies to sing in collapsed head voice, at least Evmod Hubeaux's gorgeousness and stateliness, as well as her fine acting chops as Amneris, managed to salvage her performance, even though she still seriously needs to work on her core. She needs to work on coordinating chest voice and head voice well, and actually choose her repertoire well, not trying to follow what the PR has to dictate to her. She should actually just stick to roles where she can give off naturally sensitive singing and natural lyrical singing, and not constantly trying to push her luck with these bigger, more dramatic roles. Criticisms about Evmod Hubeaux aside, with the pluses being her elegance and at least her determination to make this role work for her, I still have to give major kudos to Oksana Nosatova for vocally rescuing the performance after Maria Jose Siri just couldn't sing another note after her tenure in Ritorna Vincitor. And while Maria Jose Siri's acting did continue to grow in nuance as well as in investment, I have to give my hat off to Oksana Nosatova for rescuing tonight's performance, all thanks to her plush voice that can go astride the spinto and dramatic soprano repertoires, and she did so with gorgeous aplomb. The rest of the singers also did much better jobs, and I'm quite impressed with how Ivan Magri, Erwin Schrott, and Alfredo Daza managed to sing, even though I'm not a fan of their voices as Radames, Ramfes, and Amonazar respectively. But top marks still have to go to Grigory Shkarupa, Gonzalo Quinchawal, and Victoria Randem as the King of Egypt, the Messenger, and the Priestess for being consistent performers, all thanks to what they were able to do with their voices. And for those of you who caught this performance of Aida, the Staatsoper Unter den Linden, what'd you think of it? Did you enjoy Evmod Hubeaux's performance as Amneris? Did you feel like there were things that you enjoyed about her and liked about her? Was there a moment that you thought she was at her strongest? Did you also feel that she had some problems with her voice and she needed to fix them immediately? Or did you not like her performance as Amneris? Please comment below and let me know. Well, that's it for my review of Verdi's Aida, the Staatsoper Unter den Linden, starring Evmod Hubeaux as Amneris. Tune in tomorrow for my review of Beethoven's Fidelio, starring Sally Matthews as Leonore, also at the Staatsoper Unter den Linden. So until then, good night, everybody.